Good Monday morning, everybody. It is Angie, your host of No More Mondays podcast, the show where we believe you can have a thriving career or business and an amazing life on your terms. You don't have to choose. And it's my job to bring you guests who have not only done it and can prove it, but who have awesome tools to help you live and work more authentically. And I want to remind you, for all of you listening out there in podcast land, we do come to you live every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain, noon Eastern on LinkedIn. So if you want this conversation as fresh and hot off the presses as you can possibly get it, tune in with us there on LinkedIn. But in the meantime, today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, again, leadership. And I'm going to tell you, leading in a small business is a challenge. I would tell you that firsthand. You're kind of constantly stuck between the technician, the manager, and the entrepreneur, like you are a page right out of the E-Myth. Luckily, I have reinforcements, and I have brought them to help us. Andy Neillie is here to bring a new perspective to the world of leadership. He's a small business owner himself, so he's in the trenches with us, but he has learned how to turn managers into leaders while still leading his small business himself. He's a keynote speaker, a leadership trainer, a best-selling author, but more importantly, a fellow CrossFitter and serial dog rescuer. So he and I are about to be besties. Andy, the wheels might fall off this wagon before we even get into it. But in case we start talking about burpees and boxers, you all now know why. Let's get into this thing. Andy, welcome to No More Mondays.
Oh, Angie, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to a spirited conversation with somebody that really CrossFit, dogs, and also leadership are paths that you've obviously gone down. And I think the only thing I would disagree with that wonderful intro you gave me is I don't have any new insights. In fact, none of us on your podcast who've talked about leadership have any new insights. It's once you get past Jesus Christ and Marcus Aurelius, we're all just kind of rehashing the same
Very
stuff
true.
and putting our own language around it.
I will refrain from the urge to coach you in self-limiting beliefs, Andy. However, I actually have said to somebody the other day, like, let's just be real. There are no new ideas out there. And since society is maybe getting not smarter by the day, I don't think there's going to be a lot of new ideas, but you can bring a new perspective or maybe new approach that resonates with somebody, which is why I'm excited about this. And it's interesting. You said spirited conversation. Andy and I have never met until 5 minutes ago, everybody. But it's funny when you come on to record a podcast, sometimes within 30 seconds, you're like, yeah, this is going to be a great one and a great conversation. So I'm just putting a lot of pressure on us right out of the gate.
Yep. Well, happy to respond. I agree with you. I think it's going to be a great one.
Awesome. So here's where I want to start. I want to just go right into setting the record straight about the difference between management and leadership, because I think we're starting to become more aware of it, but I would love for you to enlighten everyone. And also as part of that, tell us why it's so important to have that understanding as a business owner or executive or business leader.
Well, great insight. Great that you recognize that. First thing I want to say is management and leadership are not in opposition to one another. It's not like someday you get to shed the manager role and become a leader. They're not oppositional, but they are different. And I think we all know that they're different. Just defining those differences are hard. I think the easiest way to think about it is management is tasked with the doing. Leadership is tasked with the being. Now, it's hard to get into the nuts and bolts of that, but management's about things and leadership's about people. If we could easily define the differences, I would say those are the basic differences.
I love that. Just this is a very simple idea of, am I focusing on a thing right now, or am I focusing on people? Because when you try, I also want to talk more about how they complement each other. Because I have this idea in my head that if you get them backwards and you're trying to lead the thing, probably not going to go as well as you want it to because the execution is lacking. Right. But more importantly, when you try to manage the people, we all know the ugly things that can happen. So dive into that a little bit more and about almost how they complement each other.
Yeah. Well, I think that they complement each other because you recognize just what you were saying a minute ago. If you just say, well, I just want to be a great leader and I want people to grow underneath me and prosper and become all they can be, and you're not paying attention to the bottom line, you're not in business next year. it's got to be this combination of hard business management. And depending upon, the listeners that are dialed in this Monday, are we looking at our P&Ls and our balance sheets and our cash flows regularly? Are we looking at our project assignments and making sure that we're hitting the agile markers that we've set along the way? Those would be considered management activities in some respects. And yet I'll say any leader that neglects those management activities won't be a leader for very long, because they won't get to do it again next quarter or next year.
I will, I'll throw a little personal, I'll put a little personal story in here that kind of validates this, but from the opposite. So that's where leaders can fall into the trap of only wanting to lead, but not appropriately manage.
Right.
And you have to kind of tune into your personality type here, because I am somebody who tends to lead and manage the way I like to be lead and managed, which is leave me the heck alone. Tell me what you want me to do and give me all the independence in the world, and I will deliver over and above what you want, like totally hands off. Yeah. But most people don't operate well under that type of leadership and need some level of management to come in and guide and provide accountability. Yeah. And there's a big gray area before you fall all the way into micromanagement. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. And it's interesting you said that's a gray area. By its very definition, we're never exactly sure what color it is, right? It's, did we do it enough? Did we not do it enough? Good leaders, they live in the tension of, seeing everything, but not saying everything. I can't micromanage. And I also can't just be totally hands off and head to the ski slopes while I leave my team alone. There's a tension there. And Angie, I'm not sure anybody ever gets that tension exactly right. One of my favorite leadership authors, Steve Sample, former president of USC, wrote a great book on leadership, The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership. And one of my favorite chapters in one of my favorite books is Leading Gray in a Black and White World. And I think he's talking about the very thing that you are bringing to the table. At the end of the day, all of us better always be wondering, did I lead well? Because if we're not asking ourselves those questions, we're probably not aspiring to become the high-performing leader we can truly become.
I want to repeat something you said. Live in the tension, seeing everything, but not saying everything. Yeah. I actually have someone I need to tell that to. They're probably not listening, but it is literally the language that I needed, because that can get you real caught up in brain dumping and giving people more information than they need and all those kinds of things. And I think as leaders, we have a threshold of appropriate information to disseminate to get buy-in, but not so much information. People are either confused, worried, whatever the thing. Live in the tension, see everything, but not say everything. It's gray in a black and white world when you're a leader.
Yep. Yeah. And a lot of those are really uncomfortable, particularly, if we think about kind of the classic personality profiling, the Myers-Briggs or the MBTI or the DISC, and that lower left-hand corner, the conscientious person where they just want things to be right. Leadership is messy, but the way you leverage your leadership, and as a result, the way you leverage your team's effectiveness, your organization's effectiveness, whoever you're seeking to influence, is by allowing it to be messy. When we entered into COVID, one of the reoccurring phrases that my management team shared with one another is, we didn't know what we were doing. I own a bunch of retail businesses. We were forced to lock the door. And all of a sudden I'm getting threatening emails from landlords saying, if you don't pay your rent, we're going to lock you out. And it's like, I'm not sure locking us out would do any good because we're already not there, but I can't afford to pay rent. And we had all these uncertainties, and my team of 7 and I, we just got on daily calls for a while. And one of the mantras we learned, it wasn't ours, it's out there in lots of good leadership literature. It's fail fast and fix. Fail fast and fix.
Yep.
Don't be afraid to try something and then recognize that didn't work, so we're going to try something else. Fail fast and fix.
I'm a big fan of you really don't fail, you learn. And I know it sounds really cliche, but it's true. And I came across a quote or a little add-on to that statement maybe 2 weeks ago, where it says, don't feel the failure, be terrified of the regret. And I thought that was just an amazing way to think about the trade-off that you make if you stay in inaction.
As a leadership consultant who blogs a lot, Angie, when I hear a good quote, the next time I write it, I'll give you credit. The second time, hey, I heard somebody say, and by the third time I quote that, can I share with you some insights that I think would be beneficial to you? So 3 times in, and I own that, Angie.
That's okay. You can own it right out the gate because I took it from somebody else and said the exact same thing to them. Wait, should we go back to the idea of no new ideas? I love the foundation we're building and just almost this visual around the tension thing. I love because I have this visual of like a tightrope walker, essentially as a leader, never being able to walk on the tightrope because it's never at the optimum tension for long enough to walk on it. And that is this imperfection, ebb and flow of kind of the leadership environment. I know you have a model that helps people kind of work through this. So tell me a little bit about the 4 leadership necessities.
Sure. Well, thank you. As you nodded and smiled at me when I said there's nothing new under leadership past Christ and Marcus Aurelius. We all do have our own voice around leadership that have thought about it and practice it well. And I've been thinking about what makes a good leader since I had some bad bosses, decades ago, early in my career. And there is a simple model, I think, that makes good sense. The 4 leadership necessities that help transform managers into high-performing leaders are conviction, competence, character, and covenant. So I laid them out very quickly. Let me go back and peel them apart a little bit. The first thing, in some respects, that very much defines someone who's not just a manager but a leader is somebody who sees the bigger picture, this whole conviction piece. That may be the entrepreneur who needs to make sure that they get out of the basement where the computer is up to the first floor and develop a strategy for their growth over the next 18 months. It may be the team leader who needs to learn to read a P&L and a balance sheet and a cash flow statement. It may be the machine shop guy who has to see the guys and gals on the entire plant floor. They've got to see the bigger picture, the broader insight. For many of the small businesses I work with, part of what we talk about is how do you understand a global economy when you're a light manufacturer in central US, because the global economy is impacting you and going to continue to impact you. That's this whole area of conviction. Tied to that probably is passion. Do we love what we do? Jim Collins' hedgehog concept. What are we passionate about? And so, manager, if you want to move down the path toward becoming a leader, part of it is you have to get your eyes up. And so you get your eyes up. That's that conviction piece. Closely tied to that is the ability to execute and get your team to execute, the competence area. The book Work of Leaders that came out about 10 years ago was this cumulative study of what followers said good leaders did. And one of the keys there was they helped us to execute better. And I think, Angie, this takes us back to some of what you talked about just even a couple of minutes ago. If I'm going to be a leader, I'm balancing the tension of making my people successful. The analogy I like almost a little bit better than a slack line or something is if we go back to geometry and we remember the fulcrum underneath the teeter-totter, and if you moved it a little bit one way or the other way, the whole teeter-totter would tip. Leaders are a little bit like that fulcrum, and they've got to make sure that their teams can execute. Are you good at what you are good at, and are you making your team better? That's the competent piece. The third one, the character piece, I think, that's just a given, particularly in today's incensed world. The truism, you will never be a better leader than you are a person. Angie, it was driven home to me very early on. I can't even say early in my career. I didn't have a career yet. I was working my way through college. I was doing construction, job site construction, and I had a boss who had an anger management issue. He would lash out, physically abusive out of his anger. And I had become a Christian early in my life. My faith was important to me. I'm reading these biographies of this servant leader, Jesus, and then I'm going to work with this guy that's swinging things at me. And I just knew that's not what a good leader is. And fair-minded and other-oriented and honest and rich in character. That I think Stephen Covey said it, more than 25 years ago in his work around the 7 habits of highly effective people. People join organizations for the job. They leave because of their bosses. That whole character piece. And I see you nodding away. You've asked me to cover this. I'm just talking a lot, but we're going to come back and peel these apart. Angie, I will tell you the final element that I was observing, it took me a long time to get it definitionally defined. I called it consistent communication. The Wiley Group calls it alignment. And here's what I recognized a couple of years ago. There's an old word, covenant, that we don't use much in modern English, but covenant is not contract and it's not relationship. It's a combination. So for instance, here in the state of Texas, I live in Austin, in the state of Texas, if a couple is going to get married, there is the relational side, love and affection for good, better and until death do us part, and all of the, I want to live my life with you. There's also a document that is signed by an officiant and recorded at the Secretary of State's office. There is both a formal side and a relational side. And when I looked at some of the great bosses I've been privileged to be alongside in my consulting and training world, they were taskmasters. They had goals. They pushed their teams. They sought to elevate teams. They had expectations. You worked hard and it was a satisfying job. Oh, and then you find out 3 months later that those 6 flights that employee had to take back to New York for their parent that was struggling with cancer, those flights were covered because the boss cashed in frequent flyer miles, and nobody knew about it, but it was the right thing to do because there was a relational connection, not just a formal connection. And I realized that's it. I've seen any number of good bosses over the years who balanced what I really called covenant. So conviction, competence, character, covenant. Sorry, I just talked at you for like 4 straight minutes, and this is a spirited conversation. Where do we go?
I am on the spot. Well, it's probably good that you talked at me for 4 minutes, because there's a few times in there I was like, Andy, shall I get on a soapbox about what you're talking about and how it relates to current events? However, I've got to draw a parallel, because there was a funny little extra piece in there that I used to be a civil engineer and I also worked in construction. And one of my experiences and one of my bad boss memories was very, very similar to yours in the exact same type of environment. And what I have, and he was like a Jekyll and Hyde. And sometimes he would be relational and act like, and I'm like, man, this is like abusive. But what I think is important that you actually started off with is, I think a lot of times we craft our leadership styles around negative experiences that we've had in what we know how we don't want to be led, and therefore how we should lead, which can be very, very insightful. But I also think it's important to base that in some sort of like positive and strength-based type of stuff, which these 4 pieces are. Yeah.
Well, and again, we laughed 20 minutes ago about there's nothing new. I mean, my simple model, it's simple, it's not easy, is really based on 25 years of talking to people and reading. And, I've cited Steve Sample's book. Any of us that aspire to be good leaders, we got to go back and read Good to Great and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Patrick Lencioni's literature. And there's, none of this is new stuff. There are certain people that like Dr. Andy's voice, right? Because it just makes sense to them. And so that's how I've been able to grow my leadership training and keynoting and coaching practices. There's a small portion of that pie where they say, man, I get it when he talks. I'm a dog person, so I can appreciate his illustrations, or I like community fitness, so I get his CrossFit illustrations. So, we all have our own angle on the same truths, I think.
Well, I mean, I love the number of book drops. I'm going to probably have to go back and listen to this. I think I have 90% of them. As you can see, I am a lover of the good old personal and business development reference material, which most of this is behind me. And it's funny because I actually had somebody say to me a couple of weeks ago, because I just recommend books all the time. And they're like, Angie, you think everything can be solved in a book? And I'm like, it can. Yeah. I have self-coached my way out of a lot of things with reference materials, which is a good, and leaders read, everybody. Leaders read. There's a reason Andy and I have a shared love of these kinds of books. And I want to go back through the 4 leadership necessities and give you, I'm going to just say the layman's term for each one of them that I picked up on, because I love myself some alliteration, love the 4 hard C's. But here's what I got. I got the eyes up, be aware.
Okay.
And be passionate enough to do something about the awareness. I got the be the fulcrum, right? It's your job to be the thing that balances and counterweights the things. My math teacher dad loves the geometry reference, by the way. I can tell you that. I'm just going to say it. The third one's don't be an asshole. I'm allowed to say that. It's my show.
Couldn't have been said any better.
And I think that applies to a lot of life. And the fourth one, I love this idea of the covenant and balancing what I would consider this formal side versus a relational side. And I think a lot of leaders, or a lot of managers, actually is the right word, are hesitant to be vulnerable enough to establish that relational side. And that's really where leadership and loyalty and leaving a leadership legacy can come from. So that one I think is oftentimes missed.
Yeah, although I fully agree with you, and I think you can fall off both ends. And I think particularly, you cited the E-Myth, I think, at the very beginning of our conversation. And how do entrepreneurs move from being the pie maker to the manager of the pie business? And I've worked with a lot of small business owners who really want to treat their people well, and they don't recognize that person at the end of the day is costing you money rather than making you money. And part of what you have to do on the formal side of that covenant relationship is have the hard conversations about performance and expectations. In some respects, another defining characteristic of the difference between a manager and a leader is managers get the easy conversations. Leaders get the hard conversations. If you're having hard conversations, that means you're leaning into becoming a better leader. Managers get the easy ones. The hard conversations always percolate up to the leaders.
Which goes back to how you kicked us off. It's easy to talk about things. It's harder to talk with people.
Well, again, you and I could both tell stories. I've had a ton of hard conversations, and I'm not sure I've done a good job with all of them. It's that tension of, man, was I too nice, and did they play me, or was I too harsh and kicked them when they didn't need to be kicked? They were already down. If you don't wake up at 3:00 in the morning sometimes wondering, am I a good boss? I don't think you're a good boss.
How did you know I was awake at 3 a.m. last night, Dr. Andy? I came up with some really great ideas at 3 a.m., as I always do if I wake up at that hour. And ultimately, this comes down to something I think is very important, and that is that no matter whether you're a manager or leader aspiring to be one or the other, or you're one of the people being led or managed, we are all human. Yeah.
I've got a guy that I think the world of. I've done some leadership development work with him over the years, Stan Slapp. He's out on the West Coast, and he does powerful, tremendous team dynamic training and coaching and workshop for Fortune 500s. Every time I'm with him, it doesn't matter what group he's taking on his journey, his final statement, his final PowerPoint slide at the back of his big stage in these big auditoriums is be human first. And I think he's echoing the very same thing you said, Angie. The tension that I always feel like I need to raise, because if I fall off the leadership platform, it's because I wimp out. I'm too nice. And I would say there's a difference between being kind and being wimpy and nice. And so that the caution I always have is, if you're a leader, you manage that tension. You realize that the board or whoever is authority over you has given you a mission to accomplish. You've got a profit margin that you're responsible for. If you're a nonprofit, you've got a certain number of services you're supposed to deliver to your constituency. And leadership, you can't be so nice that everybody says, oh, he's just a great boss, and I didn't have to work hard underneath him. That's the tension that I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, part of me, Angie, would say I'd rather be known for being too gracious rather than too firm at the end of the day. Nevertheless,
but that also doesn't mean you have to be a doormat.
That's right. That's the tension, isn't it? You have to
Yes.
balance that. Yeah.
It's funny. My final slide in every one of my keynotes is the Maya Angelou quote that people won't remember what you did. They won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And there is a way that you can be kind and make people feel a positive way in a negative situation. It's all how you approach it and seeing human.
Yeah.
Which
but
brings
I
us
think
to
I would add that you can do your very best at that. But I've led a couple of people, more than a couple of people. I've done my absolute best of doing exactly what you said as I walk them out the door, giving them an extra 2 weeks of pay that they didn't deserve, offering to follow up with them afterwards, to have another conversation, and they basically spit in my face. I mean, you're not responsible for their response. You've got to do what before God you think you need to do. But you also just have to recognize even the best leaders get it wrong at times. And even if you get it right, that doesn't mean you're held up as the pinnacle of excellence. There's still some people that aren't going to be happy with you.
It doesn't mean it's going to be well received, and you don't own that.
Yeah, exactly.
You own your actions and what you can control.
Yeah. Exactly.
And speaking of actions, wow, thanks. That was a good little segue, wasn't it? If I don't say so myself. I love actionable advice. And to me, the 4 leadership necessities really set us up for that, because I think there's an awareness there that people will start thinking about. But I would love to give everybody some tools or some little actions they can take to kind of lean into these leadership necessities, lean into the idea of being convicted and building confidence and focusing on your character and having a covenant. So what are some of your best tools and actionable pieces of advice?
So first of all, can I just say you've grabbed hold of that quicker than a whole lot of other folks that I've talked with. I'm going to take away that you like my acronym, because I've struggled with times. Some of this I'm kind of force feeding, so it's easy to remember. I think I would say in the 2020s, make sure you understand what Angie and I are talking about is much different than celebrity influencers. Leadership and celebrity influencers have nothing to do with each other. And, part of the problem is leadership is always defined as its influence, nothing more, nothing less. John Maxwell said that, and so did 500 other people. But today we have people that have amassed, 100,000 followers because of something they said or did or the way they dressed. That's not leadership. People aren't going away from that better for the time they spent. So make sure that we don't confuse celebrity influencers with true leadership. I think leadership is the bottom of the pyramid rather than the top of the pyramid. And until leaders understand that, and not only understand that, but agree to abide by that, they're not really paying the leadership price.
I'm gonna turn this around a little bit, because I love it. And the way I'm gonna turn it around is that celebrities influence because of the level of visibility that they have. And if you are leading to be visible, you're leading for the wrong reasons.
Right. Yep. Some of the best leaders that have led organizations incredibly effectively, you and I don't know their names.
Nope.
Because they just sat at the bottom making sure everybody else was fully functioning.
Intention. Have the right intentions. Have your character aligned with your intentions. Yep.
We've talked about dogs a bit. I have kind of a big personality, and one of the dogs we rescued, in fact, the dog that's on the cover of my little bestseller, The Golden Principles, I would come home from a business trip, and it's midnight, and I got in last flight back into our hometown, dropped my suitcases, walked in the house. I'm home, expecting everybody to come running to, my ego, and Redford would run exactly the opposite direction. And part of what I had to learn was I had to come home. Angie, your audience that loves animals, I would come home and do a play bow in the laundry room right there inside the garage. I'd get down on my hands and knees and stretch my arms out. We've seen dogs and even cats will do these play bows, and basically that's saying, I'm safe. I'd like to have fun with you. We can be friends. And it'd be midnight in a dark house, and I'm trying to woo Redford. And I recognize that's what I'm supposed to do. If I want to earn his trust, this wounded, neglected, abused, puppy mill breeding sire dog that we rescued after a year of a hellacious life, I had to get down to his level in order for him to trust me. And I think in some respects that encapsulates a lot of what you and I have been talking about.
Yeah. There's an element of, also side note, this makes me feel much better about when Steve is our dog. When I brought Steve home a year ago as a reservation rescue and he ran under the bed and stayed there for 2 days, that makes me feel a lot better about that, Andy. But there's an idea of, as leaders, knowing your people. That goes back to the covenant and the relationship, knowing them well enough to know when you need to bow.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because some of them you need to fist bump. Some of them you need to bow. Some of them you need to run alongside. Some of them you need to give them time, right? Exactly
some just need to be left alone. And I actually think as a practical piece of advice, if I'm coaching like a leader or executive who's about to start a new role, essentially your first month is getting to know people one-on-one with every single person, know their goals, know their motivations, know how they like to be rewarded, know when you need, know who needs a fist pump and know who needs a bow. That will go a long way to some of what we're talking about. So I'm going to push you for a third, because right now we've got have good intention and the right reasons for being a leadership so that you don't fall into the idea that you just want to be a celebrity influencer. Know your people, know when to bow, know when to fist pump. Yeah. What's a third practical piece of advice somebody can deploy in this leadership ecosystem?
It's not about me. If you're an effective leader, I mean, we've already really talked about that in many different respects, but recognizing it's not about me is the mantra of a good leader. If I do a great job and I don't get any accolades, but my team excels, that's the accolade I was looking for. It's not about me.
If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. Yeah. Also one I can't take credit for, but I've said it enough that now I will.
Well, and it's interesting because you and I, we share the passion for CrossFit. Those of you that aren't familiar with CrossFit, the strength of CrossFit is the community. You show up and you're part of a class and you're part of a community. You're part of a gym. And so you get to know these other people. The interesting thing is when you're doing a workout and you're at the bottom of a burpee, Angie, and you're trying to fight, am I going to get back up for the next 8 minutes of this AMRAP, as many rounds as possible? It's an individual exercise you're doing, and yet you're doing it with 18 other people. And so they pull you up. It's not about you. It's about the community. And yet it's, as a result, also about you. And 3 months later, 6 months later, 4 months later in my life, that CrossFit community has changed my life because of me showing up.
Yeah. I 2 of my best friends are from my gym, and it was a byproduct I never expected to have. And while this isn't a talk about CrossFit, and although everybody who's listening, who listens to me at least more than twice a year, has heard about CrossFit or follows me on LinkedIn, has seen a video of cleans. There is something to be said by having a community who pushes you through something that they don't directly benefit from. No. My gym bestie doesn't really get anything out of me doing burpees faster, but she's still there cheering me on. And I think there's something to be said for that as a leader, of cheering your people on, even when there isn't something for you to get out of it. That's your job. It's a behind the scenes, lead from behind, make everyone else successful. And in that, you will also succeed.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you said that. And in that, you will also succeed, because the truth of the matter is, by the way, I loved one of your recent podcasts that you just love to throw a barbell over your head. I thought this is a person I'm going to enjoy podcasting with. I'm heading to the gym this evening and I'll be throwing a barbell over my head some. But the point is, when you are focusing on your community, you get better. And that's what I think, Leaders Eat Last, a podcast and a book that Simon Sinek became a 1 million copy bestseller. My comment a minute ago, leaders are at the bottom of the pyramid, not at the top of the pyramid. So, leaders should be invisible, but when they do that well, they typically also end up being the most highly compensated person in their organization. and they're recruited by other firms that have bigger opportunities for them. And so, when you're 8 minutes into that 12-minute AMRAP, my CrossFitting friend, as many rounds as possible, and you're pushing yourself to help you push the other people in the gym, you're also getting better.
That's it.
Yeah.
Mic drop, barbell drop, whichever one we think it should be. I feel like you added a fifth. I think you added a fifth pillar to your leadership necessities, by the way.
That's CrossFit. It's another C.
That's the sixth one. Wow. We're just hitting the hard C's left and right. But as we wrap this up, I will summarize and I'll give Andy his food for thought on the fifth one. This idea of leading for the right reasons and focusing on when you should be leading, when you should be managing, thing versus people. They work in concert and not in competition, as long as you are aware of both of them. And these 4 leadership necessities are the way that you can approach it. I love a framework to bring awareness to this.
Thanks.
Are to have conviction, be competent, focus on your character, and have a covenant that focuses on both the work and the people. And in that, you will get the fifth, which is the community.
Oh, I love it. You know what I said about stealing ideas from other people? There's going to be
you can have it. I give everything away.
Better chapter. Okay.
Better together. Yeah, I just gave you like 6,000 more words to write. There you go.
That's right. That's exactly right. Oh, what a pleasure, Angie. It's fun for me. I do quite a bit of guest podcasting, and periodically I find somebody that, you know what, she's just finishing my sentences and I'm finishing her sentences, and that makes it so much fun. Thank you for that.
We knew it would be fun and spirited, and I'm actually going to hope it was also informational, because this was fantastic, and I think that this is the start of Andy and Angie doing other things together, because we have a lot of shared perspective, shared interests, and probably similar storytelling and how we present things. So I appreciate you so much for being here, sharing your wisdom, sharing how you got into this space and found out about, how to find that balance and be that fulcrum. And I hope everybody out there found a great takeaway. Thank you so much. And for everybody out there listening in podcast land, I do want to remind you that we are live on LinkedIn every Monday morning at 10 Mountain and noon Eastern. If you want to tune into more fantastic conversations like Dr. Andy and I, you can also head on over to nomoremondays.info and tap into the bank of 150 plus episodes of this baby, as we try to help you be inspired to live and work more authentically. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Andy, thanks again for being here. I will see you all next week for another episode of No More Mondays podcast.